Welcome to the Athletic Performance Podcast, a conversation for all things performance related. I'm your host, Ryan Patrick, and today we're going to do a deep dive on everything speed, power, and strength. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to this episode of the Athletic Performance Podcast. Today, my guest is James Fryer, NMT. James is a certified neuromuscular therapist, a licensed massage therapist in Ohio, and has training in postural restoration, DNS, neurokinetic therapy, and USA Weightlifting 1. So to say James has a diverse and very intellectual background is to dismiss how much knowledge he really brings to the table. And so today we talk about a topic that I feel is very flies under the radar, because I'm fond of saying to my athletes, if you're going to train hard, you need to recover harder. And it's the recovery piece that interferes with a lot of athletes. So we have a number of athletes who are willing to train hard. They're willing to put in a lot of effort. And down the line, if they don't do work like managing their soft tissue therapy, managing their gut and digestive health, managing their ability to control stress, they really start to just overflow the cup with the amount of stress that pops in. And so I think that the topics we touch on today may not be the most exciting because we're not directly talking about power development, but these topics are so extremely valuable and are going to add so much in terms of what you need to do to actually enhance your overall performance. And so I really invite you guys to go on this journey, because we dive deep into a lot of topics. We talk about, different movement models, the PRI, the DNS, even some of the stuff that Bill Hartman has brought to the forefront. We talk about how to create useful interventions with soft tissue tools, the foam roller, the lacrosse ball. A lot of these things have fallen out of favor because the way that we used to describe them didn't really capture all of the benefits that these things can really offer. And so going back in and actually getting some hands-on from a massage therapist, or learning how to manipulate these tools to actually create a change in tension in the tissue, is super significant for helping our athletes move better. And it's something that we've prioritized a great deal since I recorded this podcast almost 2 months ago now. And we've seen better results for our athletes. And so if you're an athlete, or you're a weekend warrior, or even if you're a coach who's just kind of fallen out of favor with some of these things that don't really feel like they have a place in the scope of your workout, my encouragement to you is there's a ton of value in this. James is a tremendous practitioner and clinician when it comes to implementing these things. And I think you guys are going to love this podcast. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, please hop on, give us a 5-star review. If we're not 5 stars, message me, let me know. We want to make sure that you guys are really getting a lot out of this podcast. I've loved doing it so far. We're only in about our 12th episode, but it's been fantastic. The guests have been amazing, and I'd love to hear from you guys. So if you get a chance, please, 5 stars only. And without further ado, here's James Fryer. James, we've known each other for a few years. I think we met. We've met a couple times, but I know it's been a couple years now. We had lunch with John and Kyle Wall, who's already been on the podcast, but now you're living in Cincinnati, which is fantastic for us, because we always need somebody outside of a trainer who can put their hands on people. And that really is an area of your expertise. So I want to start very simply, because I think there is a lot of debate around, manual therapy, around different movement models. And so from your perspective, just start with what is the value of having a clinician who understands the movement models? Like, what is the value of having your hands actually go on somebody and help move them in a way maybe they're not able to achieve on their own?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, in the sense that there's so many different pieces to try to put together as a coach. Like, which thing should I be doing? What's best for my clients? And how do we, run into that? But really, I think the limitations of a personal trainer end up being where, a client that's in front of you is attempting to move in a more efficient way, or with less pain, or, to move with more ease. A lot of times is kind of where I end up kind of helping people. And that problem ends up lying in the amount of tension or compensation they need to create to do the motion that you're asking them to do. It could be as simple as a golf swing, where their golf swing feels stressed, like they have to crank themselves into those positions that the coach wants them to be in. The coach is there to guide them into the best possible swing that's going to help them play the best. But if they can't achieve those positions, then it's always going to feel forced. It's always going to feel like tension in their body when they're trying to do these things. And again, that can be for any sport. And my goal as a manual therapist is to take those clients and help their body move in a way with less effort typically, but also that they can't essentially achieve on their own. So if they're trying to move into shoulder overhead positions and they can't access that, it might be a lot more feasible for me to take their scapula, move it up their rib cage a little bit while assisting their arm in that position. So if their arm is too heavy for their strength and motor control, if somebody assists them, a lot of times they can get into those positions properly. And then they feel it for the first time. And they're like, oh, like that's what my coach is asking me to do. And I feel it now and I understand it now. So a lot of times, especially athletes, they go by feel a lot. And they only know what they're feeling at that moment and they don't know how to make those changes. And they can copy movements really well. So the best movers can make any shape you ask them to typically, but they might have to do it in a very inefficient way because they're just trying to do what you said and they don't know how to get there. So my biggest goal is to help people get there with the least amount of effort possible, and then they start to feel what that feeling is. It's kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel for them. It's wow, that's what my shoulder should feel like when I put it over my head. And now we know what that should feel like, and then we take them through exercises where they get that same sensation. And they know they're getting it right because they know the feeling in their body. Otherwise, they don't ever know if they're getting it. They're just like, yeah, I'm doing what you're saying, but it just doesn't feel right, or my shoulder still hurts, or it feels like way too much effort. So, manual therapy is the first step in movement if somebody can't achieve it on their own. And then once they get that, then all of a sudden we can, build from that space and hand them back to the coach or, whatever makes sense there. So
there are plenty of modalities available to us, right? We have lacrosse balls, foam rollers, you name it. And there was a time where I think as a trainer, we were just like, well, maybe these things don't work the way that we think they're working. And this is an area I've come back on for different reasons.
Yeah.
My perspective on it now is maybe the explanations we were using related to soft tissue work were inferior. I think we have better explanations now for maybe what's happening. And my perspective is a lot different. There are a million iterations of exercises that I can use, but there are still times where I fall short of getting somebody into the position I want, and I can't physically use that. And I guess, an easy way to think about this is, why is something like putting hands on or having something physically manipulate their body different than say, oh, I'm just going to stretch my shoulder and then it's going to, then I can reach overhead and it's fine.
I think that again, I agree though 100%, is that I've come back to using more foam rollers or using a ball. Usually I still use softer tools now than I would have before. Like I would use a hard foam roller, get spikes on foam rollers and dig in there, right? Yeah, or like the hard lacrosse ball. So now I tend to move towards softer foam rollers. I tend to move towards practice lacrosse balls or kid practice lacrosse balls because they're actually squishy. So they don't break out all the windows in the building when they're playing inside in the winter. So I use these little bit softer tools because most people can't allow for that motion to happen if they're having pain still. So if the foam roller hurts, they're squeezing and bracing. Or if the lacrosse ball hurts their foot, because most people's feet are very sensitive, initially at least, is that they can't let go of foot tension still when we're massaging it. And that's kind of where you'll see a lot of massage therapists just rail people and they think that they're making more progress that way. But people need to be able to let go of some of these tension patterns they're holding. And I think that's where I can teach them as well as a manual therapist to, oh, okay, I need you to let go of tension as we're moving your arm or moving your rib cage, where they're still having that tendency with their laying on a foam roller to maybe hold some of that protective tension going on there. So I think I can kind of calibrate how much tension they're holding, and they might not even realize it. Like a lot of times I have to tell people like, okay, let go of tension again. They're like, I did. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, and they're like, oh, like there is another level of holding on that they don't realize is happening. So I think that's a big piece of it, is like feeling what letting go really feels like, and then just regulating pressure more and more for them. And just allowing them to breathe and get comfortable, change their nervous system in those positions, I think is another tool that I love to add in to help people feel that change in their rib cage or their scapula, because you can actually feel those differences by going through breathing cycles while I'm doing the hands-on tissue work versus just gritting and holding their breath because it hurts so bad. Um, I think those are some of the main things. I think there is some placebo to the value people place in somebody putting their hands on them and working on them versus you tell them to do it to themselves with a foam roller. I think it's unrealistic to assume there's not some placebo effect involved there, but I'll take that any day of the week if they're allowing me to work on them, they're seeing progress that they weren't able to capture on their own before. So I'm not negligent in that sense. Like it's just part of the process. If people value that and they think it's going to work, they're gonna move towards that. And I think that's part of seeing the light that we talked about, is like people have to have a little bit of confidence in the thing that they're doing is going to make them better. Whether that's fitness, like if somebody hates fitness and they think it's stupid and it's not going to help them, like there's a certain level of that creates a little bit of a barrier for them to work and focus the way they need to on exercises and things like that.
Yeah, there's a few things I want to unpack there. One of the areas that you touched on that I think can be hard for trainers and performance coaches to get away from is this idea of tension. Because
Mm-hmm.
people are supposed to be here to exercise, to work out, to put effort in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a miscalibration of what is an appropriate load. So the
Mm-hmm.
strategy becomes, I'm going to hold my breath. I'm going to create a high threshold strategy where I'm utilizing a ton of superficial musculature, which is going to restrict my ability to move. And then I'm going through this exercise wondering, well, damn, this is not getting better. And I feel like you're alluding to this fact that people need to learn, like when you're moving, you have to allow for space and range of motion to happen. Whereas if you're tight all the time, that's not allowing for this freedom of movement that we're looking for. And you and I both followed Bill for a number of years. Bill talks about, ER space and movement is it's more open, it's fluid. It's you're not IRing through a whole golf swing, right? There's if I'm setting up in a golf swing, I have this initial pulse of contraction, and then there's muscular relaxation, and at the end of my backswing, I'm going to have a pulse, an instantaneous contraction, and then another release until contact. And I feel like that's an area where a lot of coaches can find themselves in trouble, or maybe even people who are trying to do these interventions, they're doing them with way too much tension and restriction and immobility, and it's just working against their efforts.
Yeah, I think, like you alluded to, the high threshold strategy, like athletes naturally have a high threshold strategy. That is how they got good at what they were doing. That's how they move fast. That's how they're stronger, right? They are inherently high threshold. And you can't be so good at high threshold and so piss poor at low threshold and expect to live your life and feel comfortable. You can play sports and feel wonderful, but when they want to go home and lay on the couch for a little bit, or I've had people like, I can't have sex with my partner because everything is uncomfortable, it hurts, I can't relax. And like all these high threshold strategies that we're implementing in them to make them faster, to make them stronger, and perform better. Nobody's teaching them low threshold strategies so they can actually enjoy and live their life and not be miserable. We don't want them to be like less sharp, in that aspect. We just need to know how to turn it down. It's more like a volume switch that they need to be able to ramp up and ramp down. And if they can't do that, they tend to just be miserable outside of their performance stuff. They could practice 5 hours a day and they feel great, and then they go home and they're miserable. So I think there's this huge lack of education around changing those strategies to low threshold recovery in that sense, so that they can actually regenerate, repair, heal, and feel good outside of their sport. Like they just get so good at their sport and that high threshold strategy that they've pretty much lost all of their low threshold strategies. And that's where they get hurt picking up a pencil off the floor. Those people don't get hurt lifting weights usually. So I think learning, it's a learned skill, and you can look at other modalities like meditation or mindfulness or gratitude or any and all of these things that inherently relax us, slow us down. For some people, it's like faith, and there's all different ways to look at it. But for me, I think the easiest way to connect with all phases of humans is focusing on our breath and mindfulness within ourselves, because we don't have to have a religion, or we don't have to have a meditation practice to focus on our breath and kind of become one with ourselves and learn to have that low threshold strategy and be less tense all the time.
When I hurt my back a few years ago, I did drive up to see Bill, and we got into this kind of back and forth. I thought it was so
Yeah.
funny at the time, but I'm a failed athlete, so I'm using athlete very, very generously. But this was kind of at the peak of my powerlifting career. I was as strong as
Hmm.
I'd ever been, but I had probably likely herniated a disc in my back. I was having some sciatic pain. It was going down into the hip really bad, to the
Yeah.
point where I couldn't walk. So
Hmm.
Bill's doing a number of things, and the ranges of motion are coming back, and the pain's not reduced.
Hmm.
But the conversation was, okay, you need to learn to chill. You need to learn to let some of this tension go. You're always in Batman mode, ready to go.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, cool. So what do I do, Bill? He's like, well, that's just it. You don't need to do anything. I'm like, no, you don't understand. What do I do, Bill? He's, well, just don't do. I'm like, no, Bill,
Yeah.
what do I do? Just tell
Yeah.
me what to do.
Tell me what to do,
And
Bill.
so it ended up being where I would do some of these restorative mobility type of exercises while listening
Hmm.
to the Calm app and
Hmm.
meditating. And it took a couple of weeks, but it really got me over the hump, and I haven't had an
Hmm.
issue since, of
Hmm.
learning how to have almost this yin and this yang.
Hmm.
But the other side of it that I was thinking about as you were talking, everything is high threshold for these athletes. They're going
Hmm.
more. They're adding
Hmm.
hitting lessons. They're adding this lesson, even recovery. Like the water needs to be colder. The
Yeah.
pressure in the
Yeah.
Normatec boots needs to be higher. Everything
Yeah.
is like more, more, more.
Yeah.
And what you're communicating is, if you want to move and you want to have some variability in just tension throughout your body, that you have to be
Hmm.
intentional about pursuing this as a practice.
Hmm. Yeah. I really do think that could be a, very, very useful skill for all humans to know. Like literally just again, like it becomes very esoteric, and oh my gosh, like I'm not a hippy dippy meditator person. Like like people have this, I can't meditate, I won't meditate. And you can look at athletes, or you can look at my career before being a manual therapist, I was a strength conditioning coach, but most of the people I worked with were people with a lot of stress. So lawyers, doctors, surgeons, real type A's in that area. And some of them are failed athletes, some of them are not. Some of them are just highly successful people, but they're the same. Like when we're talking people that are running huge companies, like it's no different than being an athlete to them. Everything's like go go, like they're tense, they're working, they're focused, and they get so much change with just slowing down and breathing. There's some people I don't even have to touch them in the first 20 minutes of a session. I'm like, we're going to lay here and breathe for 20 minutes and see what happens, just for fun. And the pain that they walked in with 20 minutes later is completely gone. And I didn't touch them once. And they see that and they're like, shit. I really do need to chill out, don't I? Like, they can put that together for themselves. So a lot of times on my first session, depending on the person, I won't touch them, especially like the first day I consider an assessment anyways. But I just won't touch them. I'll just let them breathe, and we're going to reassess what happens in 20 minutes of slowing down. And if that literally gives them full shoulder IR back and they started with 10 degrees, I'm like, I don't think you need me to touch you. Like, like I'll still do it. Like, I'm here, but I don't think that's the thing that's going to make you feel different long term. Like, you need to take this on yourself and learn a breathwork practice, or like you said, use a calm app. Like, there's a bazillion tools for that stuff now. People just need to find what's going to fit into their life, and I can't make it fit into their life for them. They have to find out where that fits. So yeah, so type A, type people. Luckily too, like I was at this personal training studio in Columbus, and it was called the Human Form, and the owners, mostly the one, is very into meditation, Buddhism, mindfulness. So a large part of the 10 years I was there, I was learning from him of like how important it is to change your nervous system and reflect on yourself and do all these things, and how impactful that was for the clients that they worked with, outside of the strength training. But like, it was a strength training gym, but it really taught people how to regulate going hard and then going soft, and just being able to move that, whether that's inhale, exhale, external rotation, internal rotation, yin, yang. It's just creating those balances for people that they forgot they need or have never experienced in themselves.
A lot of what you're talking about is countercultural. And for the people that do buy in, they tend to be on the extreme, the hippy dippy, the yogis, whatever you want to call it. How do you start to present this to people who are type A? I'll use myself as part of this. I still use the Calm app. I've been using it for a while. I've tried a couple different meditation apps. My mind runs like crazy when I'm doing it. And so it becomes a practice, not of finding the Zen state, but of just refocusing, losing my focus and just refocusing. If I can just refocus for 5 breaths, 10 breaths, 10's really good.
Yeah.
That's good. That the whole practice is to, right? Because I can, in day-to-day life, I say I mean you, me, Santa Claus, Harry Potter, doesn't matter, drift toward scrolling on social media, drift towards things that I'm stressed about. So you've already talked a little bit about using this. Let's just sit here and breathe for a minute. But how else are you drawing these people in to finding more of a balance without it being overkill and maybe losing the training effect or the thing that made them successful at what they're doing? So I use kind of athletes in mind. Like, what's your process for this?
I think for most people, it's just meeting them where they're at and how open they are to this. I think really for most people, it's getting their mind out of what something should or shouldn't be, like with meditation or mindfulness. Like, everybody has their preconceived ideas of what that means and what they need to do that. Like, I need to sit cross-legged, in an empty room and not think of anything for hours. Kind of what you said, though, is that most people's misconception is that their mind should be empty and they should never have something enter their mind or they're failing. So I think a lot of athletes' biggest thing is that they're going to fail at something, because a lot of them don't. Like, they're really successful in most of those aspects. And it's, again, type A. Like, they're afraid of failure. They're afraid of what it feels like to slow down. And maybe they're running for something. Like, maybe you start to get into the therapy end of things almost. Like, are you doing this for another reason, outside of, because we're understanding that slowing down is actually going to help you perform and feel better if we get just the right dosage. And that's kind of what's important, right? It's like, it's a dosage, for some people. And if you can accomplish 5 minutes initially, It takes a lot less slowing down than it does ramping up to make a difference. As you were kind of alluding to, if I can get 5 or 10 breaths, that's great. Like, we don't need hours of slowing down after going hard for 8 hours a day. If most people just clock in 10 minutes, like they feel substantially different. So I think it's understanding the dosage of that stuff, understanding that there's not a perfect way to do it. Like, you don't need to be empty minded the whole time. Like, you're going to think of things, you notice them, and then come back to focusing on your breath. And I think the biggest thing that helps a lot of people is just the counting. So if they're actually counting each second of their breath, it's a lot harder to think about other things. If you're just breathing and not counting, it's a lot easier, I think, for your mind to start to drift back to work or what I have to do later. But literally, it could, to me, just be the physical act of counting, almost like counting sheep or something, right? When you're going to bed, that stops you from letting your mind go somewhere else, or else you start to lose count. I think if you can focus on the counting, I think that takes a lot of the drifting away for most people, if that's something that people can add into their practice. I think
That's
that
huge.
answered your question, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy with wherever this is going because so many thoughts are running through my head. And as I'm hearing you talk, we're from a big 30,000 foot view. I feel like we're talking about principles and just balancing autonomics, right? So for
Hmm.
those
Yeah.
listening who are familiar, the autonomic nervous system, you've got your, fight or flight, and you've got your rest and digest. And this almost just cleaves any of these movement models, especially the commercially available movement models that are out there that preach that they have the answer or the solution to the problems. And
Hmm.
you, just like me and probably every other coach, has subscribed to some of these models, and I think a lot of them are great, whether it's PRI or FRC or you name it. There
Hmm.
always seems to be a stop point where it just doesn't work for this one person. And so
Hmm.
I'd like you to just talk, because I know you're very well educated in many of these models, but just
Hmm.
how you're integrating some of this stuff, where you kind of started to make this transition to just understanding maybe the bigger picture. I know this is a lot to unpack for you, but I mean, take
Hmm.
it wherever you're going with
Sure. Yeah. I think when you look at some of this very successful types of care, I guess, or rehab or whatever you want to call it, whether it's DNS or PRI, even like craniosacral, adding in some of those other pieces that, maybe a little bit more in one direction for some people. They are all focusing on breathing. The client's main focus is breathing in, breathing out, feeling that motion happen. So, those things I think can be very impactful because I think there's three or four main components to breathing in itself, right? So we have the mechanics of the rib cage. Do we have optimal mechanics happening? So does the rib cage move? Does the pump handle move? Does the bucket handle move? Like, our posterior mediastinum for some people, are all of the rib cage moving? And I think that's an important part of the puzzle for a bunch of those modalities. So a couple of them are hitting those puzzle pieces, and you're like, okay, I'm seeing good results from DNS, and I see good results from PRI, and I see craniosacral results. They're all throwing that breathing component in. Some of the other components leave out breathing. So like FRC doesn't talk a ton about breath work in their stuff. And, strength conditioning inherently doesn't talk a ton about breathing when you're getting people to move for a lot of people, yeah, sure, breathe in and out while you're doing this, or, breathe in when you go down or breathe out when you stand up. So there's a little bit of that, but you see that stuff go out the window pretty quick when people start adding load with most personal trainers. So they're using tension and motor control to drive some changes a lot of times, or adding strength, which, again, a lot of people need to add strength in order to function better. Maybe not the athletes as much, but a lot of our general population, people that are still the majority of the population, need those things. So I think it's identifying what is the limitation in front of me for my person. Is it rib cage and breathing mechanics? Is it strength and motor control? Is it, I think using these modalities is great, But if you pick PRI and this person can't do 5 or 10 squats, eventually endurance and strength is going to wreck them at the end of the day. They're just not going to feel good at the end of a full day if they have to walk and work and do things. So you can't rib cage mechanic somebody in that has no strength and endurance to get through their grueling day. So I think it's just really identifying these things and applying what's most necessary at that moment. And again, without completely unpacking everything, they all have models of you do this, then that, you do this, then that. We follow the guidelines of what we tell you to do, and your clients should get better. And I think you mentioned it. Yeah, like a lot of people get better, but there's still some people that maybe don't. And it's like, why aren't these people getting better? And when you're following a guidebook like that, you don't have a clear understanding of why it's not working because you're not used to thinking for yourself in that way. So I think having a guidebook is cool, but if you're not understanding why this theory works for these people and who to apply it to, then I think you still fall short on a few people. And yeah, you can use mentors, you can use other people to try to help you through that, and people that have been there, done that before you. Because inevitably, I've really only been a manual therapist for going on 7 years, so I don't know anything relative to people that have been doing it for 30 years. But I think creating this framework of what is happening in front of me with this person, what do I need to do to take the next steps, and then seeing where the roadblocks are happening is really the most important part of being a coach. Is like, where is the roadblock? What does this person need? And if you can't see the block, then you're at bay to the modality you're using. And I'm just going to try the next exercise and hope it gets better. But I think having your own framework or trying to create your own framework to understand those things is really important.
I had my Emperor's New Clothes moment years ago, meaning I was just kind of standing there exposed with the obvious staring me in the face
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of young coaches and even some seasoned ones buy into a movement model. They, use this movement model and they almost fail to see what's right in front of them. Right. So to your
Mm-hmm.
point, I've got a person who's clearly Gen Pop. They need exercise. They need to
Mm-hmm.
move. They need to drop body
Mm-hmm.
fat. They need to improve their resting heart rate. All the baseline, like physiologic, biomechanical things.
Mm-hmm.
And the FMS tells me
Mm-hmm.
that, well, they need to be doing a straight leg raise progression. And
Yeah.
it was one of those things where I kind of you just step back and you're like, why am I trying to intellectualize the use of this stuff? It has its place.
Mm-hmm.
It can
Yeah.
be useful, but it's
Mm-hmm.
almost a trap that a lot of, I think, coaches fall into to
Mm-hmm.
try to get more nuanced, raise their
Yeah.
perceived value. And at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, you've got to address some really simple things that are probably
Mm-hmm.
professionally within our scope of practice. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like the big rocks thing. Like, I think nutrition and fitness are so similar. So, like, you would be taking somebody that walked in the door that, like, for nutrition, that's what do you eat every day? I eat Oreos for breakfast. I eat, cereal for lunch, and I eat a burger from McDonald's at dinner. Okay, I need you now to take these 10 supplements. I need you to cook all of your food every day. I need you to go and get organic things. I need you to go to farms and get this thing. You skipped 100 steps, of taking them along that ride, and I think the same thing with fitness, and I'll have honest conversations with some of my clients too. I'm like, look, like I can do some manual therapy, but you've got to learn how to bend over or sit down in a chair or squat. Like you're not going to be able to make it through your day pain free unless you also address all these other pieces, and those people don't need more low threshold potentially. They need actually to build up some of that tolerance. And I think that's important as a coach. And that's the best thing you can do for somebody is to be honest with them, recognize where they're truly at and what's going to make the biggest impact in their life as soon as possible. And again, strength and conditioning is a long-term game. It's not a short
Yeah.
term. So that's kind of the one switch I've made is like I would work with clients for 10 years. So if their squat wasn't perfect the first month, I don't really give a shit. like we're going to keep chopping wood. We're going to change their squat a little bit. And as they're accepting to that in 10 years, they're like, man, I feel great. But with what I do, I try to give myself about 6 sessions to get people feeling good, moving good. So I'm going to be a lot more detail oriented and try to get as much shift and change happening. I need to get these results moving real quick versus in the strength conditioning world, like I'm just going to chip away nice and slow to these people. And it doesn't have to be a overhaul. But if they're coming in to see me for 6 sessions, we're going to overhaul some stuff pretty hard, pretty fast to try to get them feeling better so they don't need to spend all year working with me and spending a lot more money that way. I'd rather see them for 6 sessions and hand them off to somebody like you that then's going to be able to keep chopping wood down the road when they're already feeling better. So
Yeah,
I think that's a big part of it.
for a lot of Gen Pop too, sometimes people associate low intensity with easy, but
Mm-hmm.
low intensity conditioning can be difficult, or people can get sweaty doing it and feel like they're actually
Yeah.
getting some output. But it's been a huge driver of just overall client success for us, because I tell
Mm-hmm.
people it lowers the barrier, one, for them coming in more days per week,
Mm-hmm.
because not every,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to sacrifice you on the altar of exercise every session. That's
Mm-hmm.
not the goal of
Yeah.
this. You've
Yeah.
got 40 pounds to lose. We don't need to be crushing Tabatas right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just come in, do this rhythmic stuff. And
Yeah.
that I found has actually helped a lot of people with their pain management too. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
probably like a dopamine game kind of thing, because it's easy for them to get in, they do the work,
Mm-hmm.
it's low intensity, the resting heart rate comes
Mm-hmm.
down, they just feel better overall.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's so obvious.
Yeah. I think people need to earn a little bit more of a right to crush themselves if that's something they want to do long term, is like they're earning that right to go hard eventually. If they haven't done it for a long time, there's not really any point. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I have to have that conversation with a lot of people that, because a decent amount of people I get to were people that used to do fitness and always get hurt. And then they stopped completely because they always got hurt. And so eventually they're like, I got to get back into this. Like, I need to do it again. So what do? They go back to what they did before because that's what they know. They know college strength conditioning and how they did it. And that's all they have in their memory bank of what fitness looks like. So they'll want to go back to doing those things and they end up hurt again every time. So I'm like, we're going to take a whole new ride. Like, whatever you thought was a way to get in shape isn't what we're going to do again, because that one doesn't get you anywhere over and over again. So we're going to just find this new pathway of working out and moving and finding a nice barrier for entry, like you're saying, that actually feels good and you feel engaged and you feel almost relieved that you feel better after sessions than feeling worse. Like that's a fatigue based model versus a performance and health based model to me. Like people want to feel fatigued and punished sometimes, which it's a little weird, but if we can get people to move towards feeling good and having goals and focusing on performance increasing, then that model gets people a lot farther in the long run than it does just like using a fatigue based model of getting your ass kicked every time you go to the gym.
1,000%. The dichotomy we talked about before, I want that in training. So
Mm-hmm.
what's popular, hit high intensity interval
Mm-hmm.
training.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is,
Yeah.
and I don't know how, without being offensive, most of the people, like, what you're doing is not high intensity. You're just doing something continuous at a pace that you can sustain. And
Yeah.
what I found for majority of Gen Pop clients that we work with, their maximal level of output and their max aerobic speed are basically the same damn thing. They just don't have that
Mm-hmm.
extra gear. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like the high threshold stuff is too low and the low
Mm-hmm.
threshold stuff is too high. And I just want to separate those things where you can
Mm-hmm.
actually see a difference in terms of your output and what you're doing. And to your
Yeah.
point, I love that. The fatigue based model versus the performance based model. It's a massive difference in their approach,
Mm-hmm.
in their perspective, and in their experience of what exercise and training should be.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where I heard that at, but at some point that really clicked for me. It's just, yeah, I can make anybody do 1,000 squats and they're going to get fatigued, in an hour. Did you make them better? Probably not at all. Like you just made their back hurt and their hips pinch, because they gave up and they were falling forward the whole time. So I really try to use that with clients, is like understanding what they're trying to get out of their performance benefits through working with a coach or working with a trainer. If you're going to Orange Theory, like, cool, there's a lot of places that can be beneficial for periods of time. But if you're going there to feel like you just need your ass kicked, you could probably just stay home and do 1,000 squats on your own and be done with it. What are your goals? What do you want to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Be more specific and nail those things down with somebody, and make actual, gains that way.
Yeah, I mean, just go fall down the stairs. Do you want me to put a boxing glove
Yeah.
on and punch you? It might be
Yeah.
equally effective. We've got clients that do
Yeah.
Orange Theory, and I tell them, no shade at them. I get it. It's high
Yeah.
energy. Sometimes you just
Hmm.
want to go in. You don't want to think about anything. You just want to do
Yeah,
something.
absolutely.
Totally fine. But when it becomes
Hmm.
5-6 days a week, if that's what you're doing,
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
it's a zero sum game. It's not going to work
Yeah.
out long term. There's just consequences to
Yeah.
that. And really from a progression standpoint, I just feel like people plateau. They kind of hit this
Hmm.
level
Yep.
of
Hmm.
this is it. This is it. I
Yeah.
can't do anything more. So you have to start to
Yep.
separate the training stimulus.
Yeah, I think those people get hooked in that first 4 to 8 weeks where they see those improvements because it's a new stimulus, because they just got started in it. But then when they plateau, they just think they need to go harder. They need to sign up for more days. They need to do so, cut food, like that's their next goal. And then when they start moving backwards after another 4 to 8 weeks, they're like, now what do I do? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they just get lost in that transition, unfortunately, which, like, hopefully, maybe if Orange Theory was smart, they'd have some kind of coach there that guides them through next steps or nutrition, or like you could build off of that somehow. But yeah, it really makes it tough for people because they get hooked off that initial, oh my God, this is working. And then it's not. It's like, why not? Like, why am I not still progressing? And that's just really tough for most people to figure out on their own, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to backpedal just a minute, and we talked
Hmm.
about a lot about the movement models and different things. What does your assessment process look like these days when somebody comes in to see you?
Typically, I want people to come in, tell me everything they think they know about what's going on. I want people's entire backstory of everything that they think of or comes to their mind with aches, pain, trauma, issues, stuff like that. Falling off a ladder, like you name it, rolled ankles, anything they can come up with. And I like to have people go through a lot of their other physical health issues, digestion and sleep and all these other pieces, because if I can start to connect those dots for them down the road as we move through this, like you talked about rest and digest as part of our nervous system. And if people are type A's and they're strung out and they're having low back pain, but then they also only shit once a week, you know, then all of a sudden I can start to help them understand that the breath work's going to help their digestion. It's going to help them go to the bathroom. It's going to help their pelvic floor. Like all of a sudden I can kind of pull their whole health into why this stuff is impactful. So the biomechanics of our body allows us to go to the bathroom properly. So it's not just the stress part, like our physical body can be stopping us from those things too. And then they're seeing another gut doctor for why they're not going to the bathroom and they're not seeing progress. So I try to make sure we rope all of those different pieces into the initial assessment. Um, I like to make them go through the movements that they feel good about and don't feel good about. So if they have pain picking up something off the floor, I want to see what that looks like and how it feels. I'll do basics like rotation, squatting, hinging, toe touches, like the propulsion on the wall stuff. I just like to see some basic standing motions, strength. If they have issues with their calf, I might make them do calf raises, something that's like more in tune with what their problem is. Then we do some passive table tests just to kind of get a rough estimate of where that's at. Check their rib cage, check their breathing, check their stomach. I kind of palpate through there. And then we kind of identify, I want my clients to understand their body so that they can take care of it long term. They're not going to be seeing me long term, hopefully. And if I can then understand their body, they understand their body, then I'll typically talk to the coaches that they work with or therapists they work with to try to help them all get on the same page. Hopefully they leave with an understanding of what does my body do, what does my body not do, and where's my path forward to make these changes. And again, potentially roping in all their other health issues a little bit to help them get a better grasp of how their biomechanics and their stress are maybe impacting those as well. That's kind of the gist of it through the assessment. And then we usually do a couple quick things that give them some big wins, some breathing or some light manual work. And all of a sudden they see, a 30, 40 degree change maybe on a movement. Or if they go back to the movement at the very beginning of the session that they're having a problem with, and it doesn't hurt, or it's already 50% better, then they're like, oh, okay, like I can see how the things that we're doing is moving me closer to feeling great or moving easier. So I try to always make sure people have a little bit of that thrown into to understand that what we're doing is going right towards the goals that they want to achieve.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is it's not purely a mechanical model of the way you're looking and assessing the body.
hmm
And people need quick wins with these things so that they can buy
hmm
in.
Yeah, yeah, buy-in's huge because again, we need people to believe. There's a lot of my people have already went and saw 3 or 4 people. They're like, yeah, I already saw a PT. I see a chiro once a month, but it doesn't really change,
Mhm.
So they've kind of been sold before. They've kind of went through things, but I really don't think most people, they give them like what they think is wrong, but they don't really give them the light at the end of the tunnel initially to here's if we do these things, like you can see that it feels different already. And I would say 90% of the time I can get that in the first session, with people.
Mhm.
So they're feeling and seeing those things. There's a few other ones that I'm like, might be a little trickier. Like we're gonna have to dig a little deeper, but that's just communicating with them and understanding that. Then I'll be honest with people and tell them right up front. I was like, look, this is a complicated one. Like I'm going to go and do some reading and some research. I might talk to some other coaches and therapists and see if I can learn some more. And then next time you're in, we'll talk a little bit more and try some other things. I go, every time you're in, like I'm learning about how your body works better, and I'm learning what things don't work as well, which is getting me closer towards the things that will work. So we're still kind of scratching stuff off and making progress, even if we don't get the answer immediately. And then some of those cases, like it takes me 2 or 3 sessions, and then all of a sudden, like we've got it. Like we've kind of nailed
Mhm.
out a couple of the things that weren't working. But those are some of the harder cases. But a lot of times we get people changing right away, and they're like, wow, I've never actually felt my thing that hurts get better in a session with somebody before. Like they just tell me this is what I need to do, but it doesn't actually feel different afterwards. So I think that's huge for people, and they learn that trust. And I, to kind of with a tiny bit more backstory, I've went through a lot of other blood lab courses. I've went through FDN, which is functional diagnostic nutrition, which talks about stool samples to read and understand those, Dutch hormone testing. I like to be able to help people understand their body. And I think having huge gaps in understanding blood work, understanding hormones, understanding gut health, it really makes it tough for me to connect those dots when people come in with, I'm going to the bathroom once a week and I also have low back pain. And maybe your low back pain isn't like biomechanical. Maybe it's like your digestion, and like you need to be going to the bathroom more often than that. And you're never going to get rid of your low back pain until you can do that. So I like to be able to help people and help them understand those things and or communicate with their doctors and, be educated enough in those areas that I can guide them in the right direction and not feel just, well, good luck. Hopefully somebody else fixes you, see you never. So I've spent a lot of time learning about all that other stuff too.
Yeah, I think in the medical world of America, it's just punted. People get punted from one specialist to another
hmm
and get confused. They
Yeah.
get multiple diagnoses. They get differing opinions, and it's hard
Yeah.
to find something that has almost a symbiosis between these different spheres of health, right? Hey,
hmm
this
hmm
gut stuff is connected to the pain you're feeling, which you think is maybe a joint or something.
hmm
That is fine. We image the back. The back is great. There's nothing wrong. We don't know what's going on. Go see so and so. But your plea is that like, hey, these things may be interrelated, and you have to address
hmm
all of this stuff at once, just to know
hmm
what the total perspective of care is going to be for this person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really helped me as a coach and a therapist to be able to help people understand these confusing things that are going on to them, because a lot of times that stuff
Mm-hmm.
kind of happens together. Like all of a sudden they have anxiety and then their shoulders hurt and then they're not going to the bathroom. And to them, they're three different issues completely. Oh, I have anxiety. That's one thing. Oh, my back hurts. That's a different thing. Oh, going to the bathroom. That's another different thing. Like I have three new problems that popped up, but they're not three new problems. It's one problem that's tied into it's growing and adapting, and it's just causing more of a problem for you. But if we fix the one main problem, sometimes all three of those things go away. And they're like, oh, wow, like I didn't realize that those were all connected. So I think really helping people understand the human body a little bit better with simple analogies and just like talking to them like a real human and spending that time. Like I get 6 sessions, I get 6 hours of people. So I have to use that time to educate them as well as try to get them to move better and feel better. And then again, hopefully hand them off potentially to people that can help foster that relationship long term.
That's awesome. There's a lot of layers of this onion to peel back for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
to try and keep it with some, I want to circle back and really hone in on some of the manual therapy stuff and more specific to what kind of stuff you're recommending, because I think that's going to be most relevant to a lot of the listeners, right? There's some of our athletes or maybe other coaches that we connect with who are
Mm-hmm.
using these modalities. So first, what's your thought process when you're doing the soft tissue work? What are you trying to accomplish? I've heard people in the past talk about, well, GTO inhibition, all this other stuff, but what's your
Mm-hmm.
perspective on what it's doing and how can we use some of the popular modalities out there to replicate what, intermittent hands-on can do?
Yeah, I think something I've tried to understand a little bit better, and it's a kind of it's not really a popular modality, but one of the first offices I worked at in Columbus, they did a lot of what's called proprioceptive deep tendon reflex. And then really what that is it's taking all of the little subdivisions, which I didn't realize until later, and it's kind of comes off almost like a knockoff of applied kinesiology as well. But it kind of comes from this overview of MAT. Like you're saying, the muscle activation technique can help somebody feel like this joint feels better to them and it feels more stable. And then you have other people that are doing deep tissue, so that's hitting deep pressure receptors. There's lighter tissue work, which is lighter pressure receptors. We can use chemical changes, right? Like through icy hot and things that are changing some of the chemical receptors in our skin. So and RPR and all, on and on and on and on, right? That's a neurolymphatic system. They're trying to play with like old school Chapman reflexes to get things to change. And if you start to understand what receptors are stimulated and why, you can get a little better idea of what things are going to work. So, and then kind of using Bill's model and some other things, if you understand that the joints are supposed to have a certain length tension relationship, and if that relationship is either too far pulled apart or too close together, certain things are going to be constantly stimulated in that receptor. And if you can change the receptor or by moving bones apart or moving bones closer together, you can automatically get that muscle to feel normal again. So the body doesn't tell you what it needs. It just says something is wrong. Like I have discomfort, I have the fidget, I have pain. It's not telling you what to do. It's not, oh, like you need to go stretch, which is what most people think, right? Like I feel something, so I have to stretch it. But if that length tension relationship is already too long, that stretching is only going to give it like a real short term stimulus, and then it's going to feel like it comes back even worse potentially. So our body's not communicating what it needs. It's just saying something is wrong, help me. And it's up to somebody else a lot of times to help them understand what is happening in your body. Is it too much length, so we need to move those joints closer together, maybe add some strength in those areas or motor control? Or is that tissue actually too close together because the bones have migrated as the tissue's gotten tighter, and we need to create space in that area for that length tension relationship to feel normal again? So there's all kinds of things that happen, and you can think of sports too, like getting hit with a baseball in the arm. People rub it, like that changes the pressure receptor a little bit, and they're like, oh yeah, it feels a tiny bit better. It still hurts tomorrow, But like in that moment, like you can make something feel better by rubbing it. So there's rubbing, our dermoneuro system, like our skin, like how does that feed to our brain? Or if somebody doesn't have an arm anymore and their arm still hurts, like that ghost phantom pain stuff. Like, how does
Hmm.
that work? Well, that's obviously something, coming in here that's saying, I don't think this is right. And like our body is nervous or scared or so there's brain regulation, like there's the afferent efferent communication. We've got skin receptors, we've got lymphatic receptors, we've got muscle tendon, we've got tension relationships, stretch receptors. All these different things are communicating to me when people tell me about it. If I'm like, oh yeah, what's that feel like? Does that feel like an exact spot pain? Does that feel like a broad pain? Does that feel like you need to stretch it? I try to get people to communicate with me in that way. And then
Hmm.
it tries to give me a little bit better understanding from what they feel because they're the only ones that can feel what they feel. I don't know what they feel in their body. So the more they can communicate to me, the more I can understand about the receptors and stuff that are going on. And, then we can use some of our table tests and other things to actually see the relationships that are happening in the joints and the bones and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I try to use a little bit more of those different modalities. Like I've learned a few of them over the years, like some dermoneuro stuff, some RPR, some neurolymphatics, just like basic MAT stuff. Like then you just again more modalities, right? Like more and more. But the deep tendon reflex is like an over system, and then they have all of those parts within it, which I didn't actually realize at one point that they're all part of the bigger nervous system platform, and they've just chunked them each into separate classes and courses because it's a lot easier to digest that way. But
Hmm.
if you learn them all, you can essentially affect any of those receptors and parts of the nervous system. But again, I don't think you can regulate the nervous system properly unless you can breathe and move your rib cage properly and shift in and out of those places.
So if I'm an athlete, and what you're describing almost sounds like trying to jump into a Twitter thread that's a million, you know, years long of just people communicating back and forth, and there's so much
Hmm.
conversation, and all you
Hmm.
feel is ouch. So if I'm an
Hmm.
athlete at home and I've got this foam roller,
Hmm.
I've got these other
Hmm.
modalities, or I'm a Gen Pop
Hmm.
client,
Yeah.
just to put a neat bow on it, what are just some baseline, simple recommendations that you have for them in terms of how to start to implement this as an effective tool in their recovery
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. I think, again, feeling our rib cage and spine and understanding those motions. So like using simple tests like turn left, turn right, film yourself if you want. Can you not turn left or can you not turn right? Are you not getting almost a 90-degree turn out of those? So we're not able to move left rib cage back, right rib cage back. Doing like even something simple like a bolt test or a carbon dioxide tolerance test to see how well we are managing our anxiety. So you can Google those things and they'll pop right up as
Mm-hmm.
like how to run a test on those. But that's kind of telling us how ramped up we are. And if we ramp down and pull everything back down, we're going to see our standing twists and turns improve by slowing our breath down, regulating our nervous system. So usually it's going to look like you maybe inhale for 5, exhale for 7. So we want our exhales to be longer slightly than our inhales. Or, you may have to start even 5 and 5, but just getting a practice of focusing on inhales and exhales, counting those out, finding ratios that feel good, and retesting standing twists and turns and retesting like wherever your pain is. And if it goes away or improves 50%, that's partially nervous system, that's partially rib cage mechanics. And then again, I think you even have probably some good videos on YouTube is lay on a foam roller on your rib cage and just feel your ribs move a little bit. Lay on your belly, do some crocodile breathing, lay on your back, do some breathing on your back. Because if we change our body position relative to gravity and pressure, we're going to fill up different sections of our rib cage in every different position. So I think people can just try them all, especially for breathing. Like that might take you 20 minutes to lay on your sides, lay on your back, lay on your belly. Just breathe in each of those positions and just feel what's happening in our body and our rib cage. Retest your twists and turns. And I would if I had to pick a random stat, I bet 75% of people are going to move better and feel better just from laying and trying each of those positions out and spending a little time there. It's not going to be the most efficient versus having somebody tell you which ones are going to be most useful. But you can get a lot of bang for your buck just by picking each position and spending 5 minutes in each one, and you're going to stand up and feel a lot better after.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. And it definitely circles back on where we started of people just having this low threshold gear.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All right, man. So a couple of final questions for you. These can be pretty quick, but your chance to prove you're not totally hippy dippy. So what's your training look like these days?
I've been just trying to explore. I love stealing other coaches' YouTubes and going through, and I think after a while of lifting and moving, it's fun to try new things again. I want to feel like a beginner at things again. Last year I started playing with a steel mace just for fun. I'm like, look, I want to learn something new by moving. So I love Zach Couples, like, YouTube's awesome. So I love going through his. I just pick like 6 exercises that he has. I'll go through and just start throwing them together, see what my body feels like, explore moving through that. I'm expecting a little girl here in the next week or two. So I got to work on the being more condensed and efficient with all this stuff too, and making sure I get some work done. And I love just trying new shit that I haven't done. So I like to just peel and dig into some stuff right now. And I haven't been following any planned programs at the moment, but I love just feeling new exercises that I've never tried before in my life and seeing if I can still have enough athlete in me to make them happen or not.
No, I totally get it, man. It's just nice to explore and play a little bit. I mean, that's why I do jiu-jitsu. I mean, it's a little bit more combative and intense, but there's times where it's more technical work, and I'm moving in ways my body is not used to. So I totally get that.
Yeah, new movement is just so fun to experience as a former athlete. Again, loosely used, but being able to try all those things again and feel like you're a beginner is a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you're about to be a first-time dad?
Yes, sir.
Oh man, are you getting nervous yet?
I'm excited, man. Yeah, I feel like I'm as prepared as I'm gonna be. I'm getting up there in age a little bit for a first-time dad, so I'm ready to get cranking and test it out.
It's gonna be so much fun. You're in for a world of excitement and joy. So I'm pumped for you. I didn't realize you guys were that close, but congratulations on that.
Yep. Thanks, man.
All right. So last thing, where can we find out more about you?
Yeah, my website, www.jamesfryernmt, so neuromusculartherapist.com. My IG is the same, James Fryer NMT. Yeah, you can reach me through the website or through IG that way. And that's pretty much my main means of communication at this point.
Awesome, brother. I'll tag that in the show notes, but I appreciate you being on. Man, this was an amazing conversation, and for not having anything scripted, I thought we covered a lot of really important ground. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge, and I'll definitely send listeners your way.
Man, thanks so much.
Take care. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate and review us with 5 stars only, then subscribe so you can get all the latest updates.